In today's video, we have some updated NHL trade rumors to discuss. Today, we're focusing on the Chicago Blackhawks, the St. Louis Blues, and the Los Angeles Kings. And that's coming up next. Welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some more updated NHL trade rumors to discuss here today. There's still lots of speculation. We've kind of been in a holding pattern here. Many teams are obviously needing to make room due to salary cap issues and creating some cap space. There's still lots of RFAs that need to be signed. There's still some pretty decent UFAs out there as well. This past probably 5-6 days, there really hasn't been a whole lot of activity. So we're kind of in a holding pattern. So once things start to move, I think we're going to end up seeing a flurry of activity. However, I do feel some of the teams we're talking about today could end up being rather active. Now, when it comes to the Chicago Blackhawks, they obviously are in a position where they could stand to free up some cap space. And one player that very well could be moved would be forward Artem Anisimov. Now, Anisimov had a form of a no-trade clause over the past couple of years, but that is now expired. Now that we're into July, the no-move clause on his contract is not in effect anymore for the remainder of the contract. Plus, he also had a fairly substantial signing bonus paid out during the month of July here as well. So that really makes him a much more tradable player. He has 2 years left on his contract with a cap hit of $4.45 million, but the actual cash component of the actual amount left owing to him is only about $5 million over the next 2 years. So really, for a player who can be, a 35 to 45 point centerman, play number 2, number 3 center on a given team, he's got pretty good size. I can see him being a much more attractive commodity now to be traded for. So I can certainly see some other teams being more interested in him than they had been previously. Like I said, with all the moves that the Hawks have made, they are kind of tight up against the cap here. They still have some other players that they need to look after as well. They very well could go down the route of also moving a defenseman. They do have 8 defensemen here under contract. Of course, you got veterans Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook. You have the newly acquired defenseman that they picked up here recently in Calvin DeHaan and Olli Mata. Of course, you get Eric Gustafsson, who had a breakout year last year. You got Connor Murphy, Slater Cuckoo. And they also have some great prospect defensemen that they'd probably like to get more playing time for in their lineup this year as well. I mean, Henry Yokoharu had some pretty decent games last year. Not quite clear if Adam Boqvist will stand a good chance to get in to the lineup this year or not, or where he goes for the coming season. But they have a lot of youth that they'd like to get in there, and they have a lot of veterans. Obviously, they try to change up their blue line through some trades that they've made, but now they kind of have too many guys that they could afford to let a couple of guys go here. Obviously, if they move a guy like Dahlstrom or Slater Cuckoo, it's not going to really give them a whole lot of cap space, but every little bit does kind of help here. Obviously, the 2 big veterans like Keith and Seabrook probably aren't going anywhere due to their contracts. The 2 guys they just acquired likely aren't going anywhere. They very well could decide to sell high on Gustafsson, who had a career year last year and really broke out with all the extra power play time he was given and really exploded for his goals. So they could choose to go down that road. He is a pending unrestricted free agent and might be looking for a big raise based on his current production that he just put up here. So it might be an opportunity to sell high on a player who may or may not be able to reproduce what he did last year. So either way, the Blackhawks are likely looking to free up some cap space, and these are the most likely players that should be traded or very well could be moved here this summer. There's certainly some decent depth players that other teams might find attractive here. So I do expect the Hawks to be somewhat active here once the market starts to open up a little bit more. Now, touching on the Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, they certainly have some tough decisions to make, as many cup winning teams do. They don't have a ton of cap space, but they do have a fair bit of players that need new contracts. One of those is unrestricted forward Patrick Maroon, who very well might find himself going to a new team next year, might have to leave the hometown team that he just helped win the Stanley Cup. He obviously would like more than a 1-year contract that he took last year. He's getting a little bit older. He's not going to have too many more opportunities at new contracts, so he needs to take advantage of this. And the Blues likely are not going to be able to bring him back. So there apparently is interest from other teams. But like last year, he's really taking his time, trying to be patient. Obviously for family reasons as well as, the fact that they won the Cup, would like to stay in St. Louis, but it's not looking too promising. Now, the Blues did sign Zach Sanford here to a new contract, which was just announced earlier today, $1.5 million, so that's looked after. But they also have a bunch of other RFAs as well, including forward Oscar Sundqvist. They've got Robbie Fabry. Of course, goaltender Jordan Binnington's going to take a pretty good sizable raise here, so that's going to really eat into their salary cap space here as well. And they also have forward Ivan Barbashev and defenseman Joel Edmondson. So with everybody they need to look after for new contracts, I mean, they may or may not decide to keep everyone, but Maroon's certainly a player who I think they would like to keep. They're interested, but just going to prove to be too difficult. So I fully suspect Patrick Maroon, once he finally does sign, likely is going to have to leave St. Louis and head off to a new team, unfortunately. No, that's not exactly what he wants, but unless we see the Blues make a trade, and one of the few players on the team that would make most sense for them to trade would be goaltender Jake Allen, who's kind of become the backup. It would kind of make sense for them to get him a fresh start somewhere else where he might be able to regain a starting role. He's got 2 years left in his contract, over $4 million, but right now reports indicate that the Blues are not planning to trade him. So therefore, they'd have to cut costs in another manner, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense based on contracts on who else they might move at this time. So I do expect the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup team to look a little bit different on the ice next year. Not drastically different, but some of these players who need new contracts might find themselves in a new home come next year. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the Los Angeles Kings. Now, of course, as I talked about a few days ago, there was talk they were interested in Edmonton Oilers prospect winger Jesse Puljujarvi, who we know has made it abundantly clear through his agent that he wants a fresh start and have a new team to play for, hopefully as early as next season. Of course, the Los Angeles Kings' new head coach is Todd McClellan, so he's quite familiar with Puljujarvi after worked in Edmonton for a few years. So obviously he knows what he might be able to get out of this winger, although I'm not sure how Puljujarvi would feel about going to his former coach, because obviously things didn't quite work out the way he had hoped when he had opportunities here in the past, but obviously that's not all on the coach here. But either way, the Kings showed interest, and they were kind of told, you want Puljujarvi, you have to take Lucic, is basically what we had discussed a few days ago, and that offer does continue. But the Kings apparently were looking at other offers here as well. It's believed as well, though, the Kings were also having trade talks with the Arizona Coyotes prior to them acquiring Phil Kessel. Apparently, the Coyotes had made an offer to acquire Jeff Carter, and it's believed they had offered up a veteran defenseman, which many believe was defenseman Alex Goligoski. So ultimately, the Kings decided not to really pursue that offer and didn't make the trade. And if they would have, we probably wouldn't have seen them go after Phil Kessel. They may not have had the wiggle room in the cap space here to make that happen. And really, I think going after Kessel was a much better deal for the Coyotes anyway. But that is another rumored deal that was kind of being discussed. And of course, all the Kings information is coming from Dennis Bernstein from thefourthperiod.com as well. Now, he's also indicating that not only Jeff Carter, but other players like Jonathan Quick and even Tyler Toffoli to a lesser extent are on the market and are technically available. He said the lack of contract extension talks with Toffoli is concerning, the fact that they may be looking to trade him more than we might be led to believe here. But ultimately, the LA Kings are going through a bit of a retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it. They need to inject some younger players into their lineup, so they need to decide to make some moves based on what is available. Things were pretty quiet with them during free agency, which wasn't a huge shock, especially after the Kovalchuk contract last year hasn't really turned out to be the greatest. So they've had some bad luck that way. I didn't really expect them to make a big splash this year. Any moves they do make, I do expect more likely to be via trade. But they have the goaltending depth to move Jonathan Quick, like we discussed in the past, and it is believed that they are considering doing that if they can find the right offer. And the same goes for Jeff Carter and Tyler Toffoli. So I think a lot of these trades that are being discussed and a lot of the things that these teams would like to do are kind of at a standstill, largely due to the RFA market. A lot of teams aren't quite clear what they're going to have for cap space until some of these younger players get under contract. Until we see a couple dominoes fall, it's going to likely be a little slow here in the interim, and it wouldn't be shocking to see some of these RFA contract talks really drag it out into the summer, and you never know, we might even see some holdouts heading into the NHL season. It looks as though the current RFA crop, they want short-term deals, they want big money, and they want to cash it again later before they're going to become a UFA, or they want to become a UFA at as young an age as possible. So this group of players is taking a different strategy than we've seen in the past. A lot of these other guys that we've seen, even as recent as 2 years ago, wanted that long-term stability, that long-term contract with obviously as much money as they could, but it was more about term a few years ago. Now it's more about upfront money, signing bonuses, getting paid as much as you can, and becoming a UFA at an early age as possible. So as this changes, teams are trying to adapt, figure out what they can do, and hopefully we'll see the trade market kind of open up once some of these contracts finally get sorted out. So, of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on the trade rumors discussed today. Where are some good landing spots for the players that appear to be on the trade block? Give me your mock trades down in the comment section, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel here, you're going to see a subscribe button here on the screen. Make sure you click that to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. Turn on the notification bell as well so you're notified every time I produce new content. And if you missed my latest video discussing the history of NHL offer sheets, I'll put a link here over on this side of the screen. You can click that to watch it. There's a lot of great information in NHL history there on offer sheets that you may not be aware of. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.